We are creating a platform for those who are curious, one that tells the story from the artist's perspective. Moments in time captured from the innovators who are reshaping dance, music, theater, and the visual arts. This is the Working Artist Project.
After this week's executive orders and the Muslim ban, I thought it was very important that we hear a voice from that community. And this week I bring to you Alia Ali, who is a Yemeni-Bosnian-American. Yeah, she's all of those things. She encompasses all of those things in her identity. And I think it's very important that we realize that as Americans, we are all multidimensional and most of us are multicultural. Guys, her artwork is phenomenal. She's phenomenal. You guys, help me welcome Alia Ali to the Working Artist Project.
First of all, Darian, I want to say thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really honored to be here, and also with, somebody who's putting out a resource into the world, but also an artist.
I want to start, because I think your story is super interesting, and I want to kind of start at the beginning of your story to talk about how you got into art and why you create.
So I think create is it's a big word. It's a heavy word, and I think that a lot of people create. Some people may not be so attuned to it, or may have not had the opportunity to, but a lot of people create. You have architects, you have programmers, you have lawyers, dancers, theaters, writers, and also art. And I think the idea about it is also taking an idea and bringing it into fruition, making it alive. So it becomes a part of this process. And for me specifically, that process is so important, to have something that kind of, either throws me off, makes me question, something that disturbs me, something that I want to share. And I sort of create a process for myself to bring an idea into fruition and through visual art. And that's what I really love. And then through that process, I learn. And I think a lot of the people that I mentioned before, I think there's that thing that keeps that adrenaline, keeps that excitement, because you learn about yourself.
Right.
And then there's this other side about the creation that once you put the work out there, it's not just about putting it out. It's also about the response that you get. One of my professors told me, he said, just when you put your work on the wall or you expose it, that's just the beginning of it, because that's when things get really exciting. That's where things are sort of out of your control, because it's where you learn. The work becomes sort of a prop to get to know the people who are looking at it, who are engaging with it. And that ends up developing into new ideas, and the process starts again.
It's just so people know exactly what you do as a visual artist. Where do you classify yourself in the spectrum of visual arts?
Categorization.
they need something to hold on to,
I understand. It's something that we need. I consider myself a multimedia artist. And why I say that, I work visually a lot. And actually, this is why I love musicians, because I haven't been exposed to so much music, and it's a language that has always kind of had my curiosity. I have so much respect for people who can use it as a language. And for me, I've sort of held on to the visual. Both of my parents are linguists, and so I grew up, between 7 languages. And I ended up finding out that language actually has a really strong power to unite people, but equally it can be used to divide. And so, and I think things like music, for example, unites people much more than it divides people. Right. And would you agree?
Oh, 100%. And like you said, mainly because the language of music is universal. So you can't claim a tribe. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's an experience, and people experience it in a different way. And that feeling where you listen to it and it brings you back. It brings a sense of like longing, it brings you back to this place. And it can happen in food too,
right. Yeah.
We both lived in New Orleans, right?
Oh, listen.
So, and so they got that figured out. You know what I mean? They have that figured out. They're like food and music, and this can, you can access everybody through that. And so for me, my language that I ended up becoming visual, and it was a way Yeah, I started off as a documentary filmmaker, and I really wanted to make films that were non-narrated, that did not have a language, to make it more accessible to the world.
Ah,
And yeah, and then I realized, documentary is also it's about putting out an idea and trying to, it's also convincing people. And I didn't necessarily want to give people answers. I wanted to raise questions, and I wanted people to sort of work a little bit to find their own answers. And I found that through the visual art. So I use photography. I also think that tactile things are important. So I've gotten into using textiles and fabric, and I do moving images. So using projections, for example.
right. The
Yeah.
one piece on your website I thought was really interesting with the women holding the globe
Oh yeah, Atlas.
atlas.
Yes.
That was like, how did you come up with that?
So it came through this idea of, and thank you for referencing that. It's something that I did actually in college, and I imagined this moment where I went to an all-women's college,
Okay.
Wellesley. It's in Massachusetts, and it was this. A lot of people kind of think like, wait a second, that must be terrible. You're just all around women all the time, and and for me, it was actually an amazing experience because it was sort of like an experiment. What if every position that was available was filled by women? And it gave me an opportunity, it gave all of us an opportunity to try to experiment and fill these positions and say, oh, I can do this. Oh, I can do this.
Huh.
And yeah, it was really, and when you come into, I don't know if I appreciated so much being there, but when I left, I realized, oh, there's not a lot that I can't do. It just takes some thinking, and, I don't have to do it the way other people do it. I can do it the way that I do it, because maybe we all do it so differently. And the work that you're referring to, just because we're in a podcast, I'll describe it as it's visual. It has 5 women, all of whom are nude, and they are of different ethnicities, different sizes, different shapes. You don't see this, but just to know they're of different sexual preferences. And I asked them to hold a globe, and in this globe they move it, they maneuver it, they manipulate it, they take it around their body. And it's interesting how each of them move with it so differently, and they fuse into the other, and it's actually a slow motion that's meant to show over 5 meters.
Wow.
And so the idea is that the person, the viewer, is meant to move around these bodies that are also sort of sculptures, and to actually look at how the body, how every body is unique. I mean, we look at, for example, these magazines and we think, oh, everybody looks like this, and everybody's breasts look like this, and
Right.
everybody's nipples look like this. And we look at our own bodies and we think, well, we don't look like this. But in fact, they're so different. It's an entire world. And the possibilities that we have are as endless as the types of women we can be and that we are.
Wow. There it is. That's deep.
Thank you. Man, that was a while ago. And
Yeah.
yeah, interesting enough, I started off working a lot with nudes, and now I work with fabric, and as you know, with completely people that are entirely enveloped in fabric. So it went from one end to the other.
Yeah. Now, what's the fabric piece called?
So there are 2, and it started with one called Cast No Evil.
Those are very interesting to me, especially when I looked at it. I was like, okay, you're a Muslim woman, and I looked at saw the art before I read the descriptions and your whole thing or whatever. So I was like, wow, I wonder what this can mean. Is this like about covering, or like what are you trying to say here? It was very interesting to see that, and then use my imagination to try to decipher what message you were trying to get across to the viewer.
So I'm going to ask you a question then.
Okay.
When you were looking at it, what were you're saying that, what you were imagining, and rather than thinking about what I was trying to say, what did you get out of it? And I
Well,
will say, I'll preface this by saying, if you even kind of hated it, then tell me, because that even is a very powerful reaction. And that's also important.
right. I didn't hate it, for sure. But
Well,
it was
that's
interesting for me because this past year I lived in Qatar for 3 months. And,
really
yeah, I was there working,
okay.
and so I was like, wow, it just took me back to, because women there cover completely. I mean, the majority,
Right.
not all, they don't have to, but the majority of them choose to. And so it just brought me back to images of those women like walking down the street. And it was interesting for me to live in that situation because I could still see how much of a woman they were even when they were fully covered, and I was still very attracted to it, just the way they walked.
Mm.
It just made me notice different things about them. Even though I couldn't see them, like if Middle Eastern women, or at least in that part of the world, they wear a lot of perfume so you could smell them before you see them. And it was just like all of these different senses that I was using to be seduced by these women who were not trying to seduce me, So so that the imagery of your art took me back to that place, and also it made me think about maybe some of the women in other countries who are being forced to cover, because there are no features in your art. It's just like cloth. So it's like, man, what are you hiding? You know what I mean? Like I was like, wow, this is very interesting.
Man, I really appreciate that's a very honest answer. And I really, really appreciate that. And I also appreciate that you're bringing your own notion to it, because a lot of people also haven't been, and maybe for some of the listeners, haven't actually been exposed to women who are, people in general who are totally covered. Mm-hmm. And I think also you're right. What ends up happening is that when all the visual, the sight is removed, what is left? And you're talking about the perfume, and you're talking about, you suddenly look at the movements, and you can notice certain things, and the gaze, and suddenly the eyes become very important. Right. And
you know what? That's one thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
oh no, not at all.
One thing I noticed in Qatar is women would look you in the eyes. Like in America, women divert their eyes when you walk down the street, but there they look you square in the eye. I was like, wow, okay. And then, when the first couple of times, I was like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. It kind of threw me off, And then you kind of get used to it. It's like, I don't know what it means culturally, but it was just very interesting for me being an American man,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot there that you kind of touched on, because, for example, so where I grew up, which is Yemen, actually every house, there were two doors. There's always one for the men and one for families. And so it's the same for restaurants. It's the same for shops. There's a family section in which you go into and this might have been the same in Qatar, where you go in and you have sort of, you're covered so that women can, remove their veil and eat, in privacy. And it was the same in Yemen. And in a way, and women were very happy about this. I mean, even me growing up, I kind of liked I liked that, and I played on two roles, because my mother is, even though she's Muslim, she's Bosnian, at the time Yugoslav, she was, Eastern European. She didn't veil. She's blonde and blue-eyed. She lived sort of this, we had a like European living room. And then I would go into my dad's, the men's section, and it was, a traditional Yemeni mafraj, which is a living room. And I would be able to be in both of these worlds, which is something that a lot of children don't. Including the boys, especially when you get into adolescence. Now, bringing it back to this piece, it's a question about power. So this series was about, it's called Cast No Evil, as in bring no judgment to it. And at the same time, we inevitably look at it and we try to seek out information, because there's a power of seeing. Seeing in itself is a power, but also to be seen is a power. I mean, we show ourselves, but we, think about, for example, who are the people that veil? Everybody veils. Everybody veils. Avatars are a veil. And what we choose to release is what we choose for people to see and how they see us. I mean, as politicians, for example, there are endless examples of how there are different forms of veiling. It can be used, there's a power in being anonymous, even to a danger. I mean, we can talk about, I actually did a piece within that series, which is called Bandana. And it reflects on white bandanas and black bandanas, and they're created with white hoods and black hoods. Yeah. And we immediately reference a really horrible time, which is something, or not even time, it's something that is a part of the United States history that unfortunately still sort of exists, that exists, and it's this sort of legacy that the Ku Klux Klan has sort of kept. And there's a power of being anonymous, of committing dangerous things and horrid crimes because you're anonymous.
Right.
On the other hand, if somebody is putting that hood on you, if somebody is forcing to confine you, then that also becomes something where your power is being taken. And that same hood, which is, it's a hood, but it's black, was put on the prisoner in Iraq in the prison called Abu Ghraib, which was found by a journalist, where, Iraqis were being tortured, and not all of them were necessarily quote unquote terrorists. And so that picture became famous, and this work was an ode to that prisoner. And it's called Bandanas. And I think there's this question that I ask in the series, that are they powerful for their anonymity, or are we powerful for their confinement? And it's for you to choose whether or not these characters.
That is so deep.
But do you know what I mean? I mean, there's a way also that we, in a way, even with music and with our art, we reveal ourselves. It's not, sometimes people tell me, well, you hide behind your art. And I said, no, I reveal myself through my art. Right. In the situation of the veil in the United States, for example, I mean, women who cover, let's say, in West Asia, which some people, would refer as Middle East, but as in West Asia or North Africa or different parts of the world, then that's a different case of when a woman in Washington, D.C. is covering her head. That is her revealing herself more, saying, I am a Muslim.
Right.
So it plays on how is it that we cover ourselves? What are these barriers? The fabric becomes this question about what are the things that make us different, these fabricated barriers, the barriers that we as a society create to make ourselves different from each other. Who are the excludes and who are the includes? Mm. And what's interesting about that series specifically is that I chose to become the model. So I'm doing portraits of myself. So when I cover myself in fabric, I actually don't know what the photograph will be, because I want to be both the observer and the observed. And it goes back to what you were saying about seeing these women in Qatar. I want to play you and I want to play her. Wow. And we have to think about, it's a long process, but it's a precious process.
Man, that this whole conversation is so heavy. I'm like, damn.
We need to meet.
Right. It's like, dang, dude. Oh man, this is crazy. Well, you mentioned borders in our last exchange here, and I'm curious to know, just to switch gears to what's happening here in our own country. How do you feel about our current president putting up borders and separating people and not allowing people to come in from certain places because of imaginary circumstances?
There are a lot of first reactions that happen when and I'm going to go to specifically that, there's been sort of a development that, I think a lot of us, but I'm going to speak for myself, that I've had to allow settle in. And and I already knew that certain bans of different kinds would happen. There was a fear, there was a question of what they would be. And this was one of those things. The Muslim ban was something that it was a ban that had already existed during the Bush era. Right. We came to the States. I lived through the September 11th and post-September 11th time. And at that time, I was very confused of who I was. And a lot of things were taken from me. My language was taken from me. I couldn't speak Arabic. My father one day came home and said, from today, we are only speaking English.
Really?
Yeah, wow. Absolutely. I had, in fact, so much that I completely forgot Arabic that I had to relearn it at university.
What?
Yeah, I completely lost it. And I worked really hard at going back. And, what's even bizarre was that this was an American university that then encouraged me also to go and make a documentary back in Yemen to say, yes, you need to go back and understand what is this question of belonging that you're looking for. And I did. And I took, I studied, Middle Eastern studies, and I took Arabic, and it came back to me, but it was an opportunity for it to come back to me as an adult. And it became, and all of these things that were, my name, my full, I go by Alia Ali, which is Alia, the daughter, Alia bint Ali, which is my father. And normally in Arab countries, and they would go your name, your father's name, your grandfather's name, your tribal name. So my full name is Alia Ali Muhammad Radman al-Qubati. And we immediately started questioning, oh my God, we need to move our names. We need to do this. And, I had the long conversation with my parents saying, no, we're not. I'm not. And I always kept Ali Ali. And and for me, that's immediately a signifier. This is who I am. When somebody's talking to me, they know, maybe not specifically where I'm from, but I am an Arab woman, I am a culturally Muslim woman, and I am an American. And all of these feelings kind of came up during this ban. And all of these kind of during the Obama administration, the 8 years, there's a lot of things that I also had a problem with. More wars started. We're now in the longest war that has ever existed with the United States, which is in Afghanistan. The war started in my country, in Yemen. However, a lot of this anxiety of what was feeling and this movement to be who you are, and it made me want to come back to the United States and work. And there were a lot of problems, but I loved that era. I really did. And I love a lot what he has done for what him and Michelle Obama have done for me as an individual. And so now all of this, initially there was this fear of that being stripped away, but one can't strip that away. And what it made me think about was, first of all, there's now this question about, is it legal? It made me question and look into the legality of things. It made me re-question my citizenship and kind of think, this is what I am. This is the power that I have. And it actually empowered me a lot, because during September 11th, there was absolutely the opposite response. There was nobody protesting on behalf of Muslims.
Right.
There was nobody protesting on the behalf of Arabs. It was a strange, and there were a lot of people who were stuck in between, and me and my family were one of them. And I excused it because it was a time of learning. It was a time of growth, for this country. And it was okay if I was a part of that, and that's what kind of eventually inspired me to become an artist. And that gave me what I do, and it gave, and now I think even more is that it gives me more of a purpose to work harder. And it gives not only the purpose for me, but also people, other artists, like yourself, that gives us a reason to question our government. We have the privilege that we can question our government. In a lot of countries, we don't. I'm not going to let that go. And I think that it's absurd that there's so much misunderstanding just with vocabulary alone that has come out. And I'll give you an example. All right. We're talking about Muslim countries, right? This Muslim ban, but these are not considered Muslim countries. They're just a Muslim majority country.
Right.
These countries aren't Muslim. There's so many different, different tribes, different religions. I mean, there are a lot of indigenous people in these countries who actually don't even identify as Arab. There's small sects. I mean, that's one. Two, there's another question that's been coming out as I'm hearing through some of the politics, is that people say, well, if they banned these 7 countries, what about all of these other? And that's just a whole other conversation, because it's like, wait a second, let's go back to the first question. These should not have been banned. Let's not talk about the other places that should have been banned.
Exactly.
I mean, why is that even going into the next conversation? And so I think that this is right now at least a great opportunity, and we have to see it this way rather than getting ourselves tired and beaten down, to say, look at how many people showed solidarity. Look at how many people put their jobs on the line. How many people are willing to kind of go on strike, and are also willing to learn more about what the gap is, what is it? And suddenly it's because it's also their position and their freedoms are being, and their liberties, our liberties, are being made vulnerable. Mm. And it makes us think of us, and I love that. And I love that. And it's, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is in Morocco, and she said, you know what, there's always this whole problem about, everybody always thinks that Americans hate, Muslims, and Americans hate Arabs, and they're so against us. And this was actually incredible for the world to see, because there was so much about the protests, about the vociferous response that people had against these bans, that the world was saying, wow, right. No, that's not the case, And how did you feel? I mean, somebody who is not, how did you react to that?
I was disgusted. Just utterly disgusted by the decision, and I was like, this can't be happening in America. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like, how many times do we have to do the same things over and over? It's like we've been down this road before. It's dumb. It doesn't work. Like, let's move on. You know what I mean? And I can't believe that anyone in this country supports that, period. Like, I was kind of just pissed. Like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah.
Like, just really in disbelief, just complete disbelief. Like, dude, that's how I felt.
And Ben, and I have to say, I appreciate that so much. And I also appreciate just that at this moment that also you sought out to find somebody who is a part of that community. So just to thank you again, because things like this, like your podcast, and people who realize that they have a voice are using it responsibly and using it in a way to say, no, let's put this out there. Let's have a discussion and let's get to know somebody in that community. So Thank you.
Well, I think it's important that everyone gets to meet, because people are in communities with no Muslim people, and they're forming opinions about Muslim people based on what they see on the news, and that's ridiculous. So someone needs to present hey guys, listen, we're all out here together. You know what I mean? No matter who you pray to or whatever your situation is, we're one people, we're one energy.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned one thing, which is about the news. And I think that that's also important also as artists, as journalists, it's also our responsibility to put out different types of news. One thing that I would say, at this moment, a lot of people have been contacting me. Are you okay? Is your family okay? And yes, I'm okay. And thank God, I'm an American citizen.
Right.
And I'm not, there was a moment where I really felt betrayed. When the inauguration was going on, there was a little bit of moment where I thought, no, I'm not going to abandon this. I'm not going to abandon this because this is who I am. When I say that I'm a Yemeni-Bosnian-American, the American part of it is so important because this is where I was educated. There's something really beautiful about the United States that actually gives you the opportunity to create. And for me, I have found that people here, while I'm processing, I'm not really judged by my mistakes. Yeah. And perhaps this is by the people that I've been around, but I haven't been judged by my mistakes. And I've been more judged of how do you get out of that mistake? How do you fix it?
Right. Yeah.
And that's something precious to hold on to, and I think that now there's a huge eye that's looking at us from the rest of the world and seeing how will the people react and how will it be fixed? And so it just means that we have a lot of work to do.
Okay. I want to switch gears back to the art, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
I'm curious to know about the challenges that you face building a career, in America and abroad, and how do you do it as a visual artist?
So this is also being, you were talking earlier about, that you went to Qatar, and I assume you went there, as an artist, as a musician.
Yes, I did.
Right. And I think earlier we were also talking about it as a language, and we're very fortunate that we have a universal language. It's two binary worlds. I can go and I try to make myself very open to the cultures that I'm in. I purposely look for artist residencies that are in different parts of the world. I apply. Sure, I get a lot of rejections, but I also get acceptances. And when I go, I represent myself. I'm there to represent myself as a woman, as an artist, as an Arab, and as an American. And on all of those spectrums, I try I learn in those, I take in what's around me, and I get inspired and I create art with it. And suddenly this art becomes a part of all of these identities. And so the most important thing for me, and I think for a lot of creatives, is to just be true to themselves. For me, I think it's very important not to just have, the work that we create is a conversation, it's a dialogue, and we have to be inclusive of it. And that does not mean only in the United States, and outside, I've had conversations with other creatives and other people in the art world saying, well, the United States is an island, and things that happen there, it's their own thing. And I want to break that. And I think it's very important that I look for, I mean, I have a gallery in Madrid, and now I'm being represented by a gallery in Dubai. And right now I'm making a strong effort to try to do more artwork here, even if it is just, partial ones. And so I'll be showing in Portland, Maine, and also just trying to engage in different things and meeting other people and building bridges. And that also means to introduce and try to say, if other artists, like, try to encourage them and say, hey, you should go to this residency, you would fit over there. And I think visual art is something newer. Music to me, for example, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, but music is something that is an art that I think is as old as humans.
Right.
It has a long legacy. It's something that reaches so deep into us, and it's something that when you travel, it can speak to them. And sometimes with visual art, it can be a little bit more challenging because people are not so familiar with it. So that sometimes is what, how do you try to convince people and say, I'm curious to learn from you, but I'm also curious to take, but I'm also really curious, would like to give. And there's something that I think that would be interesting to do over here.
I think that's the best part about being an artist. It's like, you have to always be honest with yourself in order to learn and grow.
Absolutely.
And as soon as you stop learning and growing, you're lying, or you're bullshitting yourself. So you just like, okay, I've got to make a change. We're very self-aware.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm curious because that was something that I saw in one of you had written, you got to love the process.
Right.
And when I saw that, I just thought, I was like, oh, that's so spot on. Because how does the process work for you? What does that mean to you?
The process to me is like that thing inside of you that you're always pushing forward. You know what I mean? So you grow a little bit, you get a little bit better, and then you stagnate, and then you recognize that then you have to find a new way to grow because the old way doesn't work. And you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's where the growth is.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Oh, God. You said it. You have to be, we're going to say that again. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Right.
That is so relevant to today, Darian.
Yeah.
That is so,
because we're all uncomfortable right now.
Yeah. And there's a moment, it's true. Come on now. It's true. It's true. It really is. You have to be, there's almost a danger of being too comfortable, because you're just getting into, you just stay in the same rhythm, and, you're used to your comforts. But the minute you start shaking it up, things become a little bit more heightened. Things become more alive. Things become more important, highlighted.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about, these last few weeks we had the Women's March. Everyone was protesting everything. And I'm curious to know, like, in your art, do you protest through your work, or like, how does that process of work for you?
Like I said, I think it's a privilege for us as Americans that we can question things. And my work is political. There's no doubt about it. And I'll say that it's a fact. And for example, when I was doing the Cast No Evil, I talked about the concept of being included and excluded, being somebody who's always lived in a place where I never really felt like I was from there. Mm. And I was always searching, after, we moved from Yemen, then we came to the States, and then I left. I went to school in Wales. I got a scholarship, and then I decided to take time off. Everybody should take time off after high school. I went to Vietnam. Wow. I came back. I went to university here for 4 years, and then I was in New York for a year, and then I went to Morocco because I wanted to find this, where I belonged, and I wanted to be in a place where I could speak Arabic again. And I kept trying to find myself in places, and till I kind of finally realized that it was sort of a way of, I was escaping, because yourself is you, really, and that's where you sort of start looking into yourself. And I took a lot of time, and I did a project called I Speak an Image, where I thought and it was about traveling to 5 countries purely with an intention of looking at myself, in fact, questioning my comforts. And in the process, a lot of things came up, and I basically just worked with images. I limited my speech with people. I went to countries where I couldn't read the language and I couldn't speak the language. I had to work with maps. I had to, talk to people through a notebook where I would draw images and say, this is what I need. And I eventually made a dictionary of images, like a Pictionary, actually, that I drew. And you can visit this page. It's called I Speak an Image. And they're stories that are between 1 photograph and 10 photographs, and they don't have any words. So it's for you to kind of figure out what's happening. And I suddenly realized that the borders that we have are language. And I was protesting verbal language because I really find that language also very much when simplified, you can have it in advertisements, you can have, things that kind of convince you, but at the same time, it could also be propaganda when made, and can be very dangerous. And when made very complicated and difficult, it becomes totally inaccessible to a lot of people, just the choice of language that you use. And so just the idea of language is political. And so I started playing on this, and I decided to reject it. And so I moved to something that was very visual, which also made me, myself. I mean, even in the way that I name my photographs, I name them only by some sort of a type, something that's actually in the photograph, like the color blue or like a stitch or weave. And so it doesn't give you any more detail of what I'm trying to say with that photograph. You need to find out what that photograph is about, which means that you go into yourself, and there's certain disturbances, there's certain convictions that you have that, strangely enough, when I talk to people about the same piece of work, different people, I have absolutely different conversations with different people. And inevitably, people's own personal political, cultural issues come up. And that's really interesting because the work becomes a prop, and the art actually happens between me and the viewer.
Right.
So these intimate conversations are important. And so image became this very strong language. I mean, when you look up Yemen, for example, and you go to Google Maps, most of what you see are, people with guns, and you see bombings, and you see broken down ruins. And that's not the Yemen I grew up in. I mean, it has some of the most I had the most amazing upbringing in Yemen. It was called Arabia Felix because it was the happiest Arabs. That's what it was known for. It's an exquisite country. And so I thought, wow, even Google Images is producing a wrong image,
right,
a wrong language of Yemen. And so when you look up Muslim, for example, or Muslim women, you just get women who are covered entirely in black.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, wow, this is such a disservice too. So it became sort of this goal of mine, this for me, this importance to say it's my responsibility to produce an archive. And so anywhere that I travel, even though I create these sort of abstract forms, I also collect documentary and I collect photographs and I share them. And so I was in New Orleans, and when we're talking about protests, especially now, it came up more than ever. It was December 2015, and it was during these primaries, and the candidates, were sort of being selected. And there was a lot of, horrible, chauvinistic, xenophobic, racist agendas that were being pushed. I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't believe what was happening, and I could see the danger that was happening. And suddenly, when Donald Trump decided to call Mexicans rapists, I mean, Arabs and Muslims were called terrorists for 10 years now. And so I thought, all right, well, but suddenly when it started getting into, Mexicans being rapists, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is going to start to grow. And eventually, of course, it did start to grow. And I thought, okay, I'm going to look up what Mexican is. And I looked up Mexican in Google Images, and there were some ridiculous photographs that were of a little short, stubby man with a sombrero and a mustache, and, sort of with a taco. And I thought, this is embarrassing.
So Google Images is racist.
Well, I mean, it's just, I guess it's what we put into it, right? I mean,
Right.
the images that it's not, that's a platform. And so it's what we put into it. It's the archive of images. And so you have to be very detailed in what you look for. And so that it started off with Mexico, actually. And I started looking at my own prejudices. And was I afraid? And I started asking people, you know what, I'm going to go to Mexico and I want to do a project. I need to find something that we have in common, because this is divisive. You know, these elections are divisive and it's only going to get worse. And I need to find something that we have in common. And I want to go to different places and create an archive. And so, you know, I started looking into it, and I decided that I would continue working with fabric being something of that earth. And also that is literally made with the linen, you know, with the cotton that's literally made from the earth, from the silkworm. And then the patterns that come on it are actually the legacy. It's the culture manifested. And if you know Mexican textiles, probably some of the most amazing in the world,
Right.
Especially in the region in Oaxaca. And so I started there. And interestingly enough, when I was going, I had a lot of people who said, be careful, you might be kidnapped.
Oh my God.
And I was like, God, I'm sure they say that about Yemen all the time. So
Right. You'll be fine.
And so then I asked people who actually went to Mexico, and everybody who went to Mexico said, without a hit, they just said, it's the most amazing place. You're going to love it. You're absolutely going to love it. And just that, even before going, and I went, and sure enough, it was magical. And I continued on, and I created a project where it also creates an infinity sign. The journey creates an infinity sign, which I always do, in a way to set the archive in a sense of infinity. We have these decisions that we make in art, and we should create those. And that was one of them. And so I went to Uzbekistan, which was seen as this sort of like Soviet stan in the middle of nowhere. You know, but it's the heart of the Silk Route, and it's a Muslim country, and it's very misunderstood. So rich in its history, and that was perfectly reflected in its textile. I went to Indonesia, which is the largest majority Muslim country in the world. Actually, Indonesia. Who would think that? Everybody thinks it's Saudi Arabia, but it's Indonesia. Marvelous place. So comfortable in who they are. And so again, I worked with artisans. I documented. I took the fabrics, and I covered the artisans, and created this archive. I went to Japan, Vietnam, India, Kenya, Morocco, and I also featured Nigeria.
Wow.
And so at the end, it creates this work that was called People of Pattern, and it was a way to give to the people of the United States of America, actually, to the world as well, but also to say the places that that are being judged through our social media, and the cultures that are being judged, they are so skewed, just like you would. And now I've kind of reformatted it, and this is what I'll be presenting in Madrid and Dubai, into a series called Borderlands.
Now, can you explain to us what borderland versus border means?
So to me, I think that a border is this sort of harsh, man-made demarcation. It's like and I would even call it a scar. You know, borders are shifting all the time. It's a question of power. In Yemen, I experienced it because when you have a tribe and then you suddenly have a government who says, we're going to cut a border right through your tribe. It's a thing that divides people. It's very clearly black and white, which I don't believe exists. Whereas borderlands is something that's a little bit more natural. It's a porous zone that sort of is between two groups of people, and it's the place where they intersect, where they meet, where they sort of not necessarily collide, but it's this space where a lot of, and it doesn't have to be only physical. Actually, a good one that it could be with language. So, for example, like patois, or for example, in France, there's a lot of the North African Arabs, like Algerians and Moroccans, who the French, when they colonized Algeria, of course, a lot of Arabs went to France, and so they would speak French, but then they couldn't quite speak the Arabic of their homeland, so they ended up creating another language that was called Verlan, which actually means they will take a word and then they'll break it into the syllables, and they put the last syllable at the beginning.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so they've created their own language and they've empowered themselves as French Arabs. And it also created this, it's a huge part of the music. It also created a whole culture of music, and eventually it created its own culture,
Wow.
called Verlan. And actually, if you take Verlan and you turn it the other way, it's l'envers, which means the opposite,
Wow.
to turn around. So that's the borderlands. And so these characters that I photographed over this series of the 7 months that I traveled, it was then to pull out, because what I realized was that a lot of people were living on these borderlands and a lot of people were questioning, it made me think about what is a nation and what is a community and what is a household and what is this notion of the people who leave and the people who are coming, who want to come back. What happens to them when they leave? And then when they come back, they feel like they're sort of, they're different. There's something that's changed about them. I don't know if you ever travel, that you go away and you stay there for a long time. And then when you come back, you're like, wow, I'm a little bit different. Oh. And there's some things now that people just won't understand.
100%.
Right? That's you also experiencing that. And it's sort of like when you're away, like what, sometimes when people are away, like if they, we're talking about words like migrant workers, sex trafficking, people who have been stuck, exiles, asylum seekers, refugees, even veterans, even expatriates, nomads, all of these people, these individuals who will leave. And when you're in a new place, you're an outcast.
Right.
And there's a danger because the outcast becomes sort of a villain.
Yeah.
And what's scary about that is that even, you're sort of, because there's this confusion. What's scary is that when that's even in a community, when there's an outcast, there's always this sort of mutation where that person, because they're so different, are somehow seen as a villain. They're like criminalized, and yet they've done nothing.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just. So it's these questions, and it's more about, like I said, raising the questions about who are these people on the borderland, especially now with the situation that's happening in Syria and about refugees. I mean, my God, they're refugees, they're seeking refuge.
Exactly.
And all of these people who are exiles, asylum seekers, I mean, we have to categorize them and differentiate them, and each of them then have a different value of mobility. And to me, that's a problem, because they're all suffering and they're all escaping, and they all have a lot of them have a wealth of knowledge. They're
Right.
not the people who they don't want to leave their homes.
Of course they don't. They're being forced. Yeah.
These are the questions that I kind of think like, wow, we really need to revisit this,
for sure,
and break this down into conversations. And so this work also becomes about how the second body of work, this Borderlands, where the portraits that I do are kind of eerie, and they're kind of, and the idea is to actually look at them a little bit. I mean, they're aliens. Mm-hmm. They're foreign. And that's actually what we call people that are non-natives. We call them aliens, Darian. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
So we also have to question language in all of this. Well, and at the end of the day, are they just displaced people?
Right. I think people need a way to dehumanize people so that they feel comfortable, ostracizing them or like excluding them from their group. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, that we're really good at that in America. It started with the Native Americans, and then we did it to African slaves, and so on and so forth,
Absolutely. And I think that that's something which is really interesting, because even if we talk about Native Americans who have been here way longer than, any of the colonists who have come in. And even though that some of them still have their land, they're seen as reservations, right? And there's still this kind of loss of sense of community, right, that has been broken up, that there's these borders that have just been drawn on them. These have become scars. And the problem is that we're still dealing with that today. Right. When we're talking about African slaves, there's such a strong, I went on a study with and the African Studies Department from Wellesley, and we went to Ghana. And we had a really long discussion about the sense of longing and belonging.
Yep.
And I think that day, it was an entire day, changed so much of how I see things. and realizing, wow, everyone's experience is their own. And there's also an importance of realizing that there can be empathy, but this is also important about the borderland. You just cannot pretend to understand everyone's experience.
Exactly.
And you shouldn't try. You have to be honest about that sometimes it's important to be on the borderland and, to be on and on the fringe, and to kind of say, I can try to access this as long as I completely understand that I won't understand this, and there's a lot of these. And it's the same, like, now we're talking about the situation of refugees, and why is it important that we support this? Why is it, why? Because they're stuck in this nowhere land, and yet we're vilifying them. And like you're saying, dehumanizing them.
Exactly.
And that we have come to a point where we have to use photographs by journalists of a baby washed up.
Right.
We need that to make them human.
Yeah. To evoke any emotion. That's disgusting.
That is like horrifying to me. And I just think this makes us even more to think about how we, in the conversations that we have, and the people, and know who that we're talking to, breathe, and know that who we're talking to, and say everybody also, we access them differently. Some people, will listen to you in a different way. Some people will, they might listen to the music and kind of say, wow, that's just unbelievable. And something will move in them. Just people react in different ways, but it's our responsibility to be aware of that now even more, and see how that it can become a part of our daily life and conversation.
100%. Now, this leads me to my next question. How can we come together to show people that fear isn't the way? Fear isn't the answer.
Who is the we?
We as a people, like, I mean, the United States, really, like, or just we as a people in the world, because we all tend to fear each other. Like, for instance, when I was in Qatar, at the souk, like, people would ask me where I was from, and when I would say America, like, the vibe would change. Or like this Pakistani guy was cutting my hair, and I said I was from America, then he no longer wanted to talk to me, and it was, and I'm just assuming it's based on like this notion of fear or hate. And I just think fear breeds every other terrible emotion. You know what I mean?
I think that's right. Because when you said fear and hate, I think you're right. So to me, fear, I think it goes to how I would define fear. And for me personally, I would call it the unknown. Mm. And we're afraid of what we don't know. And sometimes people, I think, don't know how to deal with the not knowing. So it's much easier to just label it, categorize it, and put it aside and say, that's what it is. And that's how I feel about it. Next. And sometimes this is an occasion where things have been brought up to the spotlight. I think that and I feel so strongly about this, that this has changed through education, through our classrooms, through music gatherings, through galleries. I think it's important to make things more accessible, especially in the visual arts. And I try to work on that. Like I'm telling you, yeah, they're galleries, but I also make sure that I always do artist talks, that I do interviews, that I try to do workshops. So how do we get away from this fear? We can only do, speaking for myself, the only way that I can work on that is to work as an individual, right, and go into communities with my art there, but also use it as an opportunity to get to know individuals, get to know people, make myself open to questions. And also go and have conversations with people who, for example, on my Facebook, I have a few people who've sent me sent me not so nice messages, if I will say, and who have participated in conversations, but on my feed, but I don't cut them off.
Right.
And man, sometimes I have that feeling, but breathe. And I don't cut them off, and I respond and say, if this is your way of trying to engage in a conversation, I'm open for it, but do another introduction. Right. Ask me a question. I think it's through knowledge. I think it's through communication, and not necessarily verbal communication. I think also now that we can appreciate our passports more. I mean, when you're knowing that now we have people who even have their green cards who have legal status, that they're questioning whether or not they can come in and out.
Right.
That, you know, so now it's even more of a reason to say, wow, we should really appreciate a lot more of what we have and use it and travel and share that knowledge and engage in conversation and sometimes and engage in, you know, exchange. And sometimes you're right. Like you're talking about this gentleman who just sort of had this, you said you felt like he just had this fear or this hate or this anger towards you. That may not be a great place to have a conversation with the man because it takes two.
Right. Of course.
So, you know, it's about setting, I think it goes, I mean, it's hard to answer this question. I'm sorry, because it's also, but the way that I do it is that it's through my art. I make sure that I lecture. I seek out places where I can, you know, I try to make my art about questions, not about answers, and make it as a space for dialogue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I'm not trying to vilify the guy, you know, who was cut my hair.
No.
It happened a few times with different people, and I think it was mainly because of the rhetoric that was coming from America, from Trump and the, you know, all those people. And, you know, people were defensive, so they didn't know where I stood. They just knew I was from America, and they associated me with that. So they immediately were like, okay, I don't want to talk to you anymore or whatever. You know what I mean?
No, I completely, look, it goes both ways. And I think that, you know, I had that feeling. I get that feeling. I mean, I had that feeling when I was living in New York, and I never changed how I, you know, introduced myself as a Yemeni-Bosnian-American. And it's a way of staying true to myself. And when I was at a gig and I remember this guy and I said, oh, I'm a Yemeni-Bosnian-American. And he's like, what is that? And I said, I'm a Yemeni. And right after I said that, he was like, you bombed us.
Oh, wow.
And he said, you know, so you're like a terrorist.
Wow.
And I just, I mean, at that moment, I wasn't, you know, that was probably the first time that somebody full on had this, you know, and he was a bigger guy and he had this confrontation and it was in the evening. And I just thought, you know, I'm going to step away from this. And I still to this day question whether or not I've engaged, but I know that at that time that wouldn't have helped anything.
Right.
You know, because it just wasn't the timing. And I go also abroad, and when I say, oh yeah, American, well, Americans are, you know, ridiculous. They're awful. They're so ignorant. And then I immediately say, well, what music do you listen to?
Right. Exactly.
I mean, what's on your, you know, iPod? Okay. Let's stop right there.
Beyonce.
You know,
all right. Done.
Right, exactly. Or, you know what I mean? Like, you know, Ella Fitzgerald or somebody or any sort of, which you probably don't even know if her name's Ella Fitzgerald, but that's all right. You know, Bob Dylan, you know, Jimi Hendrix, all of these people, like whatever. So, and I, you know, and I talk about some of the amazing people who have influenced me. And I think it's something that we need to remember, that especially in this time, we shouldn't have their efforts go in vain. You know, there are a lot of activists, as you know, now, you know, being an Arab American artist whose work is quite political. The people who have influenced me are not only Arabs or Muslims or Americans. They're people like, you know, Gloria Steinem, Angela Davis, Virginia Woolf, you know, W.H. Auden, James Baldwin, you know, all of these people that for the efforts they did, we now need to do it for them too. Kind of, you know?
Yeah. So I like to ask, we're getting to the end here, if that's okay.
No.
I know.
Of course.
I like to ask everybody who comes on the show this one question. And if you listen to it, you've probably heard it, you know. But I just like to know what you're most thankful for. 3 things. I have to limit it.
I am most thankful for my mother. Who her entire life was an exclude. And she taught me how powerful it is to live on the border. You don't have to identify as what other people identify. You're the one who creates that. Somebody who was a professor, did architecture and linguistics, but actually wanted to become a photographer and a fashion designer, but just couldn't. And so because of her and her support, and my father's support as well, they were totally enthusiastic about, go do art. And they've supported me incredibly so. I'm very thankful for my education. because a lot about my education, a lot of it has to do with my university, with Wellesley, is that it is what made me the woman that I am. And I think a lot of people go through life not realizing the power that they have as women. And it made me realize that I actually don't have borders. You don't have to see them as borders. You can just see them as something else, and you can overcome them. I think for the third one, I'm stuck between two, but
I'll say two more. It's fine.
Okay. Thank you. I'm really thankful for having one of them is definitely having the passport. And why I say this, and being an American in this sense, because had I not had that opportunity and had I not become an American, I would not have had the access and the mobility and the possibility to question things to the extent that I do, to visit the places that I did, and to at least learn and to continue being a student, and to have also, different places, and because of that mobility, to be able to share my work. So I'm really thankful for those liberties.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's something that, if anything that's happening right now, I hope that people can appreciate it as much as I do. And it's good that we're ending, because I'm about to get teary-eyed. I can imagine my life had I not had it, and I would be, I possibly would have been in this war in Yemen right now. And at least I'm now here on a podcast talking to you about how we can change, make a difference, and what we can do. And I'm also very thankful for everybody who supported me in doing this, because it's not only my parents. A lot of people, actually, the whole project that I was doing now, Borderland, was funded by individuals. I did an Indiegogo, and it was really incredible that people were throwing in. I mean, let me tell everybody who's out there on a podcast, artists, arts professionals, whoever's listening to this, that if somebody gives you a project and they're asking you for money, they're not asking you for $100, they're asking you for $5. And it's okay. We can also be producers, and we can support each other even with $5. And I ended up raising $10,000 with people putting in between $5, $100. Some people who could put in more, they certainly did. And it's so appreciated. And now it's a work that I hope will resonate not only here, but to the rest of the world. And it's because of you that it's being produced. So and it's changed how I look at producing other people's stuff. I mean, anything, I shouldn't, now people are going to be like, yeah, you should fund it. But if it's a project that I believe in, I will. Yeah. Even if it's small, it's something.
There it is. Sure. Listen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Working Artist Project today, man. Oh, I want people to make sure they check out your art. What's your website?
Oh, thank you. It's alia-ali.com. So that's ALIA-ALI.com.
Cool. I'll make sure I link that in the description along with her bio and a bunch of other links. So click them all, check it out. And yeah, man. Oh, wait, man.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I really want to tell you, this was such an honor. It was really fun. I have to say, I was one always gets a little bit anxious at the beginning, but you really, you make it so comfortable. And thank you for creating such an intimate space.
Oh man, I don't know if you heard, but my dog was back here snoring the whole time. She was real comfortable.
Oh, that's perfect. That's great.
So
perfect. Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Later.
Take care.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to the Working Artist Project. Before you go, I need you to do a few more things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on iTunes and Facebook. I would love to connect with each and every one of you. It would also be awesome if you guys could check out my Patreon page. The link will be in the description. Click the link below, become a patron. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.